This is the ultimate 350cc shootout. We have got every model Royal Enfield 350. We've got the Hunter, the Meteor, the Bullet and the Classic, and we've got the all new Honda GB350S. And in this video we're going to compare these bikes and decide which is our favourite.
Before Honda introduced the GB350S to the UK and EU markets, there were only the Royal Enfield 350s to choose from. So the most obvious starting point is the engine. Now these Royal Enfields produce 20.2 brake horsepower, whereas this Honda produces a little bit more, 20.7. That's nothing to split hairs about really. The torque figures peak at 27 Newton meters at 4,000 RPM on the Royal Enfields, and the Honda has a little bit more, 29 Newton meters, which peaks lower down in the rev range at 3,000 RPM. And the lower the peak torque, the better, because that gives you that lovely low down grunty chug 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 chug, which is what you're looking for in a motorcycle of this size.
Now, aside from the performance of the engine, let's talk about the looks. Now, the Honda GB350 has the best looking Honda engine I've seen in a long time, apart from the CB1100 RS, which we don't get in this country anymore. This is a fantastic looking engine. But my only qualm was, does it look as good as the Royal Enfield 350? And it really is a close call. I think the engine in the Classic 350 is one of the best looking modern classic engines on the market. It really is a good looking engine. The polished finish is really, really pretty. And on the left hand side of the bike, I think it's just so good looking. And normally bikes are less good looking on the left hand side than they are on the right. But I can definitely say the engine on the left hand side on the Royal Enfield is better looking than the Honda, just about. That's in my opinion, of course. But obviously in the different models of Royal Enfield, you don't all have this polished metal look. Some of them have got this sort of black matte finish like you've got on this Bullet 350 here, and again on the rest of these 350s we've got here. It's not too dissimilar to the GB350's engine. That's got a slightly less matte finish on the engine. It's a little bit more shiny. This is like a ripple paint. The beauty of having a black engine is that it's easier to clean, and also it doesn't tarnish. Whereas a polished metal engine, you do see some of these Royal Enfields, if they've not been meticulously looked after, we saw a few in India, they start to get a bit of pitting and corrosion on the engine. That won't happen on these black versions, of course, but if you do have a polished metal engine, you've got to look after it. So whilst it may look nicer, it only looks nice when you look after it. So coming on to the, oh, for God's sake, give me the phone. Hello? Oh, hello Arnold. What's that? You want them to subscribe? You want them to do it now? Okay, Arnold said do it now. The next thing is the mudguards, because a mudguard has a purpose, which is to protect the motorbike from mud, water, wetness on the road. And the mudguard on the GB350 doesn't do a particularly good job at doing that. As you can see, the engine is completely filthy. It could be classed as two-tone brown and black because it's covered in mud. So this needs a longer mudguard like you get on the Classic 350, and they do have a classic version of this bike available in India and in Japan, which does have a very similar front mudguard to this. But the difference is that even though this is a short mudguard, you can say the same if I run over here and look at the Meteor and the Hunter, whereas they've got a shorter front mudguard, but they've got a mudguard extender down on the bottom, so it still protects the engine. I do think they don't look particularly nice having a mudguard extender, and you might as well just put a bigger mudguard on to start with. But if Honda wanted to sort of solve that issue, perhaps there is a aftermarket mudguard extender available.
One of the most pleasing things that I found out and noticed straight away about the Honda is the steering geometry. Now if you look at the angles of the fork, they're less steep than they are on the Royal Enfields, particularly the Hunter at the end, which are very much steeper. And the steeper they are, the more sharp the steering. And there becomes a point where the steering can get too sharp, which I would say is just on their verge on the Hunter. Whereas this at 27 degrees and a longer trail, I won't go into the technical details, but this makes more stable handling, and it's stable in the corners as well as on the straights. And I think this makes for a much nicer ride. The classic 350s are fine, but again, they're a bit steeper, and at higher speed you can notice that twitchiness a little bit more, but on this it's fine. So let's have a look at seating position, because you do need to sit on the motorbike, believe it or not. Now, the Honda has what I would call a semi-sporty seating position, and it feels fine, and my knees are fairly bent. It looks like that. It's okay. I mean, I've been riding it around for quite a lot, and it's fine. Whereas the classic 350, as you can see, your feet are further forwards, and that's much more comfortable. I like that a lot more. If we had this seating position with that rake and trail, this would be better. It's exactly the same on the Bullet. The Bullet kind of gets ignored a bit because of the classic 350, but they're basically this same bike, different mudguard and a different seat. There's not a lot to it. So that's the Bullet. The Meteor is even more further forwards. That's really comfortable, actually. I like that. That's a nice riding position. Ooh, yeah, I like this. Yeah, I do prefer my feet a little bit further forward than further back. The Hunter is, again, more sporty, a bit more like the Honda in terms of leg position, but you do feel that rake on the steering. The front wheel feels very close to you. So, seating-wise, this would be the last, in my opinion. That's the most comfortable. This is very comfortable, and the Honda, for me, is probably less comfortable, so second bottom for comfort in terms of leg position.
Now, in terms of handling, the Honda is a really nice handling bike. It's very confidence inspiring, and you definitely can have a lot of fun in the twisty lanes in the countryside. I actually rode this bike in Japan, and I rode it up some mountains and back down again, and it was fantastic fun. And we've done a lot of riding on the classic 350 as well. We rode this bike all across South India in Goa and Karnataka, and it was just fantastic. It really is a brilliant all-round bike. You can throw anything at it. You can go off-road, you can go over big bumps, you can sort of go in and out of traffic. It's a great handling bike. It's really, really fun to ride. It's brilliant. The Bullet handles very similar. It's lovely, it really is a nice bike to ride. The Meteor is similar in terms of the way it's laid out, but because of the different riding position, the handling feels slightly different. You feel a bit more relaxed. It's a bit more of a cruiser style, this bike. So this is sort of like a miniature Harley Davidson, if you like. I don't know why Harley Davidson aren't making a small capacity actual cruiser and not that horrible ugly thing that they make in India, and also they make them in Japan as well, but they're different. They're actually a Benelli of all things. I'm getting sidetracked. But the Hunter is probably the most darty of them all. It's got the smallest wheels, it's got the steepest rake, so this is the twitchiest bike of the lineup here. It's probably more suited to a shorter rider because of the height of it and the compactness. When we sit on it, we look like big, silly circus apes. So in terms of, if you want a sort of slightly more modern classic styling, the Hunter and the GB350 might be the one to choose, but it depends on your height as well. Now, when we were riding across India, we did find that on the classic 350, after long days of riding, after 5 or 6 hours, we did have a sore bum and sore back. And I think that the seat, perhaps, if it was a touring seat and it was a little bit more plush, we might have been less sore in the buttocks. And if it was a flat bench seat as well, it would have given us more room to sort of move around and get to the right position for our height. We sort of found that often we were sort of sat on this seam here to try and stretch our legs a bit. The Bullet, I think, would be better in that sense because of this seat, because there's no seam in between, and this is a lovely looking seat, isn't it? It really does look good. The Meteor perhaps would have been more comfortable for the ride because you've got longer, sort of further forward foot position, and your arms are slightly wider out. So for someone who's over 6 foot, perhaps this is the more comfortable bike. It depends where you want to sit. Now the seat on the Hunter is quite plush actually. This is quite a comfortable seat, whereas if you compare it to the GB350, whilst that is also comfortable, the paddedness is slightly less, so it's not as padded, but it's kind of got a nice shape to it, and you've got plenty of room to move around for different heights of rider.
Now, we both agree that really, when you're choosing any one of these bikes, the number one factor is looks, and we'll go into that in a second. But from our point of view, to rank these bikes now, let's start eliminating as we go. In terms of the steep brake and the handling and that slightly twitchiness and less stability you get, the Hunter comes bottom of our ranking, and also in terms of looks. So it's quite modern. We're not so much into the modern bikes. Then we move on. The Honda is kind of the most similar to the Hunter, yet it also looks a lot prettier in our opinion. It looks more balanced, it's got a nice shape to it, and it's quite a good sized bike. We're big guys and we find riding this Honda absolutely fine. So, as I said, it's down to looks, and it's very subjective, isn't it? If you're choosing between these 350s, it's not really a question of specs because they're all so similar on paper. It really comes down mainly to looks, I would say, and perhaps handling. So talking about handling, I think the Honda pips it on the handling front because of the steering geometry and the wheelbase and all that sort of thing. I'd say this comes first, followed by the Classic and the Bullet. The Hunter handles a little bit too twitchy, the wheelbase is a bit short, you've got a kind of a fat front tyre and it's very steep brake, so that's the sort of least enjoyable riding bike in our opinion because it's a bit too twitchy. Some people like that sort of handling. And then it comes down really to the looks. Now, one of the things that you have to look at when you're riding a lot is the speedometer, and on the Honda it's got an analog one, which is nice, but it's offset and it looks a bit cheap, so I don't like that. This is a beautiful one. It's in the centre. It's very beautifully designed, so this is very nice, plus that headlight. Same on the Bullet. This has got an analog one in a more modern style, and it's really offset, so that's out of the question for us, as is this one. That's offset and the same design as that. So that rules that out. That's a shame. Let's go on to the next factor.
When it comes to the exhaust, I think the Classic 350 has definitely got the most beautiful exhaust out of the 5, and this one is in chrome, which just looks fantastic. It's a pea shooter design, it's very classic, it's very beautiful. The Bullet 350 has got the same exhaust, but this one is black, and the black finish that Royal Enfield use is very hard wearing. It's going to stand up the test of time very nicely. The Meteor over there has got a nice exhaust. It's very sort of cruiser-esque styling, proper old school cruiser looks, and again in the same black finish. The Hunter and the GB350 I'd say are on par with the worst looking exhausts out of the 5. In terms of the way they all sound, they're not too dissimilar because they all have to go through the same Euro 5 plus regulations. They don't sound as good as they could do. But I would say the Hunter and the GB350 are kind of on par in the looks of the exhaust. I like the fact that this has got a chrome heat shield, that looks nice. But this sort of black finish that Honda use, I think over time doesn't stand up the test of the weather and the rain, etc., as well as that black finish that Royal Enfield use. In terms of the fuel tank, the Honda has got a very nice looking tank when you're riding the bike and looking down. It's got some interesting shapes. It's a nice thing to look down upon. From the side, I would say the Classic 350 has got a nicer looking fuel tank, but when you're on top of the bike, it's a little bit less interesting when you look down upon it. There's not so much going on. The tank on the Bullet is exactly the same as the Classic 350, but you've got a different Royal Enfield badge on the side, which is very nice. Rather than the sort of standard Royal Enfield badge, this is very cool looking. It's nice to have something different. The Meteor, they've gone for that sort of trying to look like a cruiser, a bit sort of Harley styled tank, but it's very round and it's very oval shaped, so it does look a little bit like an Easter egg, but it's not bad looking. It's not bad looking. I like that colour as well, very nice. The Hunter is slightly similar shapes to the GB350. It's a bit narrower. It's got a sort of carve out of the side. It's not a bad looking tank actually. So overall, it'd be hard to choose between the Classic 350 and the Honda, I think.
Now, looking at the headlights and the forks, they've all got conventional right way up forks, which is good because that's what you want on this sort of motorcycle. Now, they've all got the same, the Royal Enfields all got the same headlight at the front looking forwards, but on top it's slightly different. So this has got a matte finish, this has got a bit of a chrome bezel, if you like, and a shiny finish. That's nicer. This is really beautiful. You've got this lovely peak design across there, and then it's incorporated into this lovely speedometer thing here with two little lights there. And then the same on the Classic. But coming to the Honda, you've got this kind of very modern looking headlights with these sort of plastic bits for the sake of design. So that's the least favourite. So the Classic and the Bullet win on that front.
Now, if price comes into consideration, which it does when you're buying a motorcycle, the cheapest is the Hunter at $3,899, and there's only £725 in it from the cheapest bike here to the most expensive, which is the Bullet at $4,625. The new Honda is only £100 more than the Hunter, so this is a really well priced bike, and they've come in right at the correct price point, I think, to compete with Royal Enfield. But between the rest of the models, there's not much in it. You know, the Meteor is about £50 more than the GB350. The Classic is just under £4.5. So it's hard to say, but perhaps if you were on the fence and you were thinking, oh, I really want the Classic, but now I kind of fancy this Honda, maybe the price might be the tipping point, but also styling, etc. But if price is a factor, obviously the Hunter wins because it's the cheapest, but they're all not that far apart.
In terms of the forks, again, these are lovely, and I like the gaiters on that, but I really love these covers, these metal covers on the stanchions here and here. So for me, it's between the Bullet and the Classic for the winner on the forks. Right, so we're going to get to the finale now. Now, as I said, it's not all about the specs. They're all very similar. The brakes are all pretty much the same. The engines feel pretty much the same. So any one of them is going to be great. But we've got to rank them. So let's start with this one. This would come bottom for us because of the steering geometry and the looks. A little bit too modern, a little bit too small. This comes next bottom, and it's just because it doesn't look quite as cool as the other two. It's a good bike, don't get me wrong, but I think the overall aesthetics of the bike don't quite get it as well as the Classic and the Bullet. Now, between the Bullet and the Classic, again, it's down to aesthetics. This seat, although it's very comfortable, isn't particularly good looking, whereas this seat looks cool. So really the Classic wins on the seat, and also the rear mudguard design on this is different from that, and this looks nicer in my opinion. So overall, I think the Classic 350 just pips it over the Bullet 350 for us. So coming to the Honda from the Royal Enfield lineup, so out of the Royal Enfields, for me, it's the Classic 350 that would be the one we would go for and rank the highest. What about the Honda, the new kid on the block? Now we're looking at the GB350S. If we had sat here, the GB350C, C for Classic, which looks much more like the Classic 350, then it would be a very, very hard choice. There's elements of this bike that I like more than the Royal Enfields, the steering geometry being one of them. The engine, actually we didn't cover that, on this, it's got a higher top speed. You can do 70 in fourth gear on this, and then fifth gear, it's like a really long gear for sort of cruising on the motorways and things like that. So it is a faster motorcycle with top speed. Acceleration wise, they're about the same, but when this is cold, it's a little bit lumpy, and that's down to probably the fueling to get it through all these new emissions tests and things. So it doesn't help manufacturers make bikes run smoothly. So overall, and again, the classic version of this has the same slightly off-centered, cheap-looking dial. So that's a shame, because that's beautiful. So, but we've got this here in front of us, so this is what we're comparing. So between the two, if I had to part with my money, I would choose the classic 350, because overall it's a beautiful looking motorcycle, perfect mud guards, beautiful engine, lovely classic spoked wheels, beautiful exhaust pipe. Everything's just right. You can always change a few little things like handlebars if you want to and make it your own. If only that had the rake and trail of this, that would be even better. But overall, weighing different things up, I'd say that just pips it over this. And again, the mudguards on this are not particularly functional. They're so sort of modern looking, they don't do a lot. So that's got so many more pluses that has to be the winner of this shootout. But let us know what you think.